And we are live. Welcome, mystery and thriller fans. I'm your on air host, Sara DiVello, and I am so excited to welcome today, live from London, Winnie M. Lee, here to give us the inside scoop on her brand new red hot book, Complicit. Winnie, welcome to Mystery and Thriller Mavens. Tell us about this book.
Cool. It's great to be on your show, Sarah. Yeah, I'm really excited about Complicit. I mean, not just because the cover is so shiny, like kind of if you bend it in different angles, you can catch the light. It's quite cool. But also, it's a book that means a lot to me. It's often described as a film industry thriller. So it opens with Sarah in autumn of 2017, and she's kind of leading a pretty quiet life as a I guess a screenwriting lecturer at a Brooklyn community college. And then out of the blue, she gets an email from a kind of celebrated New York Times journalist who says he has a few questions about a producer she once worked with in the film industry 10 years ago. And of course, it's a male producer. So in some ways, we kind of know where this story is going to go. And Sarah did work in the film industry 10 years ago, and she once had a quite promising career, which suddenly doesn't exist anymore. So I guess the mystery for readers and also for that journalist is to find out, what happened to her 10 years ago, and how much is Sarah herself, because she narrates the entire book, how much is she going to tell to this journalist, and if she can trust him or not.
Well, I can't wait to get into every delicious detail because Winnie, you yourself are a veteran of the Hollywood world, which I think so many of us are fascinated and curious about. And we have so much to talk about. But first, I just want to welcome everyone. We are broadcasting live to 6 different destinations. As we always do, it is Mystery Monday. And because Mondays can be murder, we're here to make it a little less painful. So if you've been here before, you know the drill. And if you're new, welcome. We're so happy to have you. Here's the drill. Every Monday, I give you my handpicked featured authors, and you get to ask them anything. So ask Winnie about her days in Hollywood. Ask her about this book. Ask her about her process. Is she a plotter? Is she a pantser? Is she a plunger? How long did it take? Did she get to pick the cover? Oh my God, so many questions. Get them going in the comments. This is your time to talk to this author. So Winnie, I will kick off because I know it takes everyone a minute to type their questions or think of their questions. So I want to kick off with some of the amazing praise that your book has earned. So first from Sarah Pierce, the New York Times bestselling author of The Sanatorium, who raves, as soon as I read the first few pages of Complicit, I knew it was going to be a compulsive read. Winnie M. Lee's powerful and beautiful writing immediately immersed me and kept me furiously turning the pages. Through her assured storytelling, Winnie draws you into the protagonist's world on every level. So first of all, congratulations on that amazing review, which you have earned. And second of all, let's talk about, from a craft perspective, how do you think, what have you learned? How do you pull someone in, like Sarah Pierce, to get them furiously turning the pages?
I don't know. I certainly wasn't aiming to be like, okay, I want people to furiously turn pages. For me, I was just trying to figure out a way, how do I tell a story, which on some level we think we all know, right? Because hashtag Me Too and the Weinstein story. How can I get readers into a story which people will think they know, but actually we don't know what's actually going to happen to this particular individual. So in some ways, some of the suspense lies in the nature of what Me Too is about, right? And that is, sexual assault and abuses of power, often sexual abuses of power within the film industry. But the film industry it's a pretty unique working space. There's a lot of other industries that have similar issues, of course. But it's in some place like film or entertainment where you kind of get this huge power dynamic where somebody, a young aspiring filmmaker or wannabe filmmaker, or somebody who just loves movies and wants to be part of that world, who doesn't have an into that industry, right? Because it is a very tough and mystified industry, and that's changing now. But it used to be I had to know someone to actually get like an interning position, right? So how do you So I wanted to use Sarah as like our kind of way into understanding that industry. So on one level, you have the present day story, and she's quite jaded and bitter, and we don't know exactly what she's bitter about, quite cynical. But then she's telling the story of what happened to her 10, 15 years ago when she started. And she was really bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and, quite naive, obviously, but really just wanted to make her mark in film. So it's kind of about that, like kind of that interplay between like the bitter, jaded Sarah and the bright-eyed and bushy-tailed innocent one, whom we sort of know is heading towards is it tragic or but certainly a darker, experience in film that she set out to expect, right? And that is just because you have, incredibly powerful people who can just make or break your career and people who can decide, like, not to give you that interning position, people who can demand you, spend your entire day, photocopying scripts and stapling them together, and that's, you gotta do that for the next, like, 5, 6 months of your life, and like that, there's something about trying to keep the faith and thinking that I'm gonna one day have a better career than this. And then also being in a situation where you feel like you always have to say yes to every demand that's asked of you by your boss. So
Hmm.
that kind of environment, which can be quite sinister in its own way, I wanted to kind of draw out and to kind of compare the really naive, passionate young Sarah with this quite dark environment that she's walking into.
Mm, mm. I like I'm just kind of noticing that we are talking about your protagonist, Sarah, referencing the blurb from Sarah Pierce, and you're being interviewed by a Sarah. So we have a triple Sarah
Yeah.
situation here, Winnie, which is, I feel like, the best kind of Sarah situation. Um, let's talk about this though, because I think what you said about the power dynamic is so true. So anytime we're talking about and drawing on your own experience in the film world, centering your protagonist Sarah's experience in Hollywood, what you said about the imbalance of power in a highly competitive and highly glamorous, therefore attractive, compelling world. A lot of people want to work in Hollywood. And we sort of see this also in the music world, in the modeling world, in, frankly, the book writing world. Anytime that it is perceived to be glamorous and it's hard to get into, it sets it up for a dangerous situation because, like you said, people want to say yes to anything just to be able to get in. Let's delve into that a little more. What do you think, in that sort of that desire to say yes, to feel privileged just to be to be in that room, to have the chance of a seat at the table, it seems like that's the root of what leads to the danger and the trouble. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, you've kind of, hit the nail on the head. I mean, that is the huge problem, right? In industries like film where, people are willing to work for free for years, right? Just to get their foot in the door. And so, with film, with the film industry, I mean, A, I know it, but then B, I also just wanted to kind of really look at the fact that it's completely manufactured, this glamour, right? I mean, like, we look at the tabloids and we watch the Oscars, and we see all these like glamorous, men and women and men wearing, like, incredible dresses, right? Being interviewed, talking about their dresses, right? And it's this incredible spectacle, but it's completely manufactured, right? And so it's this like kind of quite artificial glamour that we've sort of all bought into. Um, for we're not even really sure why, why do we care what these people are wearing in this particular award ceremony? But somehow it's its own hype machine, right? So people get hyped to watch whatever film is out, or to see whoever, whichever designer this particular A-list actor is wearing, on the red carpet. But like, we don't really know, like, why are we so excited about these things, right? So that kind of like false PR is something I really wanted to look at, right? And then also, obviously, that PR kind of kicks into place when you're talking about the story behind filmmaking, right? Because like every film has its own, behind the scenes footage and all that kind of stuff. So we're talking about like so many different layers of artifice that we don't know what the actual truth is, right? So, during Complicit, it kind of follows the making of a particular film. When Hugo North, who's this male producer, came on board and decided to finance this film. And it was also the film that launched the career of a now very famous A-list actress. I mean, these are all fictional, of course, but an actress named Holly Randolph, who Sarah was quite good friends with. So in some ways, again, I want to look at the fact that, the truth of the film industry involves a lot of hard graft and, a lot of injustice in some ways, and a lot of inequality. But on the outside, you're looking at it and you're thinking like, oh, this is amazing. You get to wear like big dresses and like go down the red carpet and, get all these, modeling contracts and some, sponsorship contracts and things like that. And it's actually like very few people who manage to get that, right? For every A-list actor out there, there's, hundreds, probably thousands of other actors who wanted to make it and never got to have that career. So that kind of inequality I wanted to look at as well, and behind all the different layers of kind of false artifice that the industry creates around itself.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting you should mention this because I'm not gonna lie. I love me a red carpet. I love the fashion. I love the dresses. I love the interviews. I love movies. I love going to the movies. I get there
Mm.
early. I mean, pre-pandemic. I get there early. I sit center. I watch. I have my popcorn. I watch the previews. I love everything about it, right? But I've actually been thinking about this. Like, why do I care about these people who I've never met,
Yeah,
who maybe they're not like solving, they're not solving the Ukrainian war situation. They're not solving global warming. Why do I care about these people?
yeah.
Why do I care about who they're dating, what they're wearing, and what is the history of that? I actually was, my next book takes place in the 1920s, and movies were just becoming popular. So that was the celebrity culture of the movies of Hollywood was just coming out. And before that, the celebrities were, quote, members of society. And people cared about what they were wearing and what they were eating and what they were doing. So it's like, and before that, in Europe, there were royals. Why do we always care about this culture of haves and have nots? I don't know. It's so perplexing when you really start to think about it.
Yeah, no, it is, and, like, I'm equally guilty, like, I will click on random Facebook videos about random celebrities, and I'm like, "Why am I watching this?" Right? But it's kind of interesting, and I guess for me, what interests me is, like, obviously, a lot of these celebrities are I mean, there are obviously some of them are very attractive, but some of them are also incredibly talented, right? Um, but it's that kind of what we expect to be a rags to riches story. Is it ever really rags to riches? Sometimes it is, but there's so much nepotism in Hollywood that half the time it isn't, right? But that story about like kind of the unknown who then gets picked and accelerated to stardom. I mean, how many movies have been made about that, right? La La Land, whatever. I mean, like, so there's a lot of movies that so Hollywood, creates its own narratives about the underdog who makes it big, right? And so that's kind of what I was trying to mimic with Complicit in that, like, Sarah is an underdog. She's a daughter of immigrants. Her parents run a Chinese restaurant in Queens. They don't really want her to work in the film industry. They want her to be like a dentist or something, or an accountant. But she has this, fascination with the movies, right? And, is there a rule saying that a child of immigrants can't work in film? No, not really. I mean, certainly in the early days of Hollywood, a lot of the leading filmmakers were immigrants, but things have moved on, and now it's actually quite difficult to get in there if you, if on one level if you're not white, but on another level if you don't have a lot of those connections. So yeah, so on one hand, she's kind of straining against this narrative that says like anybody can go out to LA and make it big, but in reality, the reality is actually quite different. So yeah.
Winnie, let's talk about diversity and inclusion in Hollywood and in the publishing industry. So I have a very dear friend who's a Southeast Asian writer, and she shared that she was rejected over 200 times and
Mm.
was told as she was trying to get a publishing deal, which she's now successfully published 2 books, that a lot of times the feedback would be, sorry, we already have an Asian book this year, as though one Asian book was enough or one Asian protagonist was enough. Clearly it's not. Everyone deserves to see themselves on the page, on the stage, on the screen. What's been your experience in this in publishing as an Asian woman writer?
I mean, no one's ever said that directly to me, but there could be any number of reasons. I mean, my book was rejected. My first book, Dark Chapter, was rejected loads of times, right? I mean, I kind of lost count, and at the end of the day, it's your agent deals with like the number of rejections. But I mean, it was well over 50. If I think about like all the different publishers in different countries that it was submitted to, it's like well over 50, probably even over 100, frankly, right? So that trying to get my first book published was heartbreaking in a lot of ways, right? And also, for me, because my first book was more directly about my experience of rape and sexual assault, I was also dealing with that subject matter pre-Me Too. So there was a lot of, people saying like, well, this is like too upfront and it's representation of this particular crime. But I mean, so for me, I never directly had anyone say to me, we already have an Asian writer on board. But I think I've often found that, people expect an East Asian writer to be addressing the immigrant story in some ways, or I mean, there's a lot of really successful, like critically lauded and commercially successful stories of, like the family that came over from China or that, came over from another country in Asia or Vietnam or what have you, and all the struggles they came up against, and, that whole story of becoming American, right? Or becoming, a member of the country that, they end up moving to. And that's often like seen in the quite literary light, right? So I often found, there's not an expectation for crime writers or genre writers to be writers of color. I mean, I think that's certainly changing. I live in the UK, so I think we're possibly a little bit behind the US, but obviously now in the US, you're getting, women's popular fiction, you're getting crime being written by people of color. But yeah, I think for the longest time there was this expectation that you'd be addressing the immigrant experience, and that's not, I don't want to write that, because that's, I'm the child of immigrants, right? And I want to write something sort of new, right? So I had never actually seen a book about the film industry that was written from the viewpoint of an Asian American woman, right? You read lots of books about the film industry seen from like a white guy's perspective, right? Where the guy is trying to be a screenwriter or a director, what have you, or a white girl who wants to become an actress, and that's often the narrative that you see in film and TV and also in books. So I wanted to be like, well, what is it like to be a person of color or an Asian American woman trying to make it in that industry, where you're already an outsider in a lot of different ways, and then you're an outsider to a very closed off industry. So yeah, I think that was kind of my experience. I didn't really overtly face any sense of, you shouldn't be writing about this, but it was more that I kind of wanted to try to break the mold and not write about that kind of quite literary, multi-generational, like immigrant epic story, which obviously would be quite hard to fit into crime anyways.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've also, hosted, a wonderfully diverse array of writers who also shared that sometimes the expectation as a minority writer is that you will write, a heartbreaking work of struggle. But sometimes, but a writer, and those of works and those stories, of course, have incredible merit, and there is a need for them on the page. But also, you may write, want to write a book about a crime story that takes place in Hollywood, and it's so great to see that there was a thirst for that, and to see the book resonating, and to see all the buzz and all the excitement that's coming out. It's tremendous. Liz Nugent, the #1 internationally bestselling author of Little Cruelties, also a huge fan of the book. Let's pop up her review right here. She said, a deep dive into the sleazy underbelly of the film industry prior to Me Too, Complicit is a brave look, at the innocents, the predators, their enablers, and those who turned a blind eye to sexual harassment, abuse, and rape. So did you feel when you were writing it that it was a brave look, or were you just like, I'm going to tell my story?
Yeah, it's more of the second one. I mean, I'm aside from being an author, I'm also an activist around issues of sexual violence. I mean, I am a survivor, right? So I never set out to be like, I'm going to be brave. I was just telling like the truth that I want to tell, right? And I was just kind of tired of a situation or an expectation that you're going to stay silent about, experiences that ultimately have changed your life, right? So yeah, I wasn't setting out to be brave, but I think probably a lot of survivors or activists around this issue find that people will say like, oh, you're so brave, but it's like, no, I'm just telling the truth, right? And like, why do we operate in a society where we're not expected not to tell the truth about sexual violence? Because it is something that happens quite frequently. And it affects a lot of people. And like, I don't really see why we need to be silent about that. And then if you widen that out, if it's not just sexual violence, but coercion or harassment or all the other kinds of less overtly physically violent things that happen on that spectrum, like pretty much like many women have experienced that. And then combined with a work culture that creates a workplace where you might not really feel comfortable being yourself or feel comfortable being a woman. So, and that's certainly stuff I felt kind of throughout my time in the film industry. And I think a lot of women did as well.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your craft. Let's talk about your practice of writing this book. So first of all, how long did it take you to write this? Start to finish, soup to nuts, A to Z. How long did it take?
A lot longer than I expected. I mean, I started in July of 2018. So Weinstein allegations, Me Too, all that kind of like broke out in autumn of 2017, right? So it was around Christmas around that time. People had suggested, you'd be a perfect person to write about this. I'm like, oh, really? I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe they got a point. So I was thinking about it. I didn't really start writing until July 2018. It was pretty much July 2020. July 2020 when I finished the 4th draft, which I then sent off to my to my agent, and then in October of that year we got the deal with my British publisher, right? And then so kind of from November for another kind of like 6 to 8 months, I was working with my editors on that. But in terms of like the manuscript that got sent and sold, that was about probably a good 2 years. But during that time, I also had a baby unexpectedly, and then the pandemic happened, so that kind of slowed everything down. I mean, if I hadn't had the baby, if there hadn't been a pandemic, I could have done that faster. It's about 2 years, and then obviously additional kind of writing with my editors.
Darn baby, slowing you down, Winnie, like just getting in the way of
I
getting
love
this.
them. No, it was great. It wasn't expected, but it was kind of a surprise. So yeah.
Congratulations on the book and the baby. Okay, so you started in 2018. You sent it to your agent in July 2020. You got your publishing deal in November, just a few short months later. Congratulations on that. What was and then you revising, getting going on that. Marcy McCreary, welcome to the conversation, saying congratulations on the book and the baby. Yes, a lot happening. A productive 2 years for you, Winnie.
It was unexpected, but I think it was an unexpected 2 years for everybody, around the world.
That's true. This has been very unexpected in a lot of ways. And so what has the path to publication been like since you sold it? Did you have to do a lot of rewriting? Was it pretty much just a go from there? How's it been since November 2020?
Oh, it was great. I mean, because I think once you have an editor on board, I mean, at least in my experience, I mean, and it's limited experience because it's really only, 1 or 2 books I've worked on. But I mean, once you have an editor on board, you don't feel like you're completely on your own. Obviously, you have your agent anyway, right? But like in terms of getting like nitty gritty like feedback on how to make this manuscript actively better versus it needs to be good enough to be bought. By this point, it's already been bought. So that ideally, the editor who acquired it is somebody who's like really on your team and wants it to be as good as possible, right? So yeah, no, it helped. I didn't come up against any big creative clashes. I did with my earlier book, but with this one, got on with my editor really well. And yeah, I just think we made it better. And so that was my British editor. And then, so we had to actually like make it better or improve it to the point where we took it to sell to the Americans, right? So it sounds weird. Obviously I'm American, but I live in the UK. So my agent's British. And they sold world rights to my British publisher, who then took it to market, or whatever the term is, shopped it around to US publishers in spring of 2021. So by that point, that was slightly different. It had been improved and slimmed down. And then we got an auction in the US. So that was pretty cool, that was kind of everyone's dream. You weren't expecting to get an auction, but then so that was great. And then I was speaking to like 5 different editors who wanted it, and it was interesting to hear their different visions on what they were going to do and how they were going to market it. So and now it's about to come out in the US.
Very cool. And congratulations on selling at auction in the US. That is so exciting. And again, I think the fact that it sold at auction and all of this praise, which just keeps pouring in, speaks to how excited everyone is about it. Christina Alger, the New York Times bestselling author of Girls Like Us, also chiming in with a rave review. Let's pop that one up. She says it is a sharply written and absorbing dive into a dark and glamorous world, as timely as it is entertaining. The spectacular novel hooked me from the first page. Winnie has a remarkable talent. Congratulations on that rave review. Marcy has a quick question. She said she missed the beginning, so perhaps you already addressed this, but is this based on a true story? So yeah, Winnie, could you just share how this actually draws on 2 very important, powerful parts of your life?
Yeah, so it draws on material or experiences I've obviously had in my own life, but the actual story that is covered in Complicit is fictional, right? So it's fictional characters, a fictional scenario. But I used to work in the film industry in my 20s. Never had a boss like Hugo North, who's the big male boss in this novel. But I often wondered, well, what would have happened if I'd had a male boss, who was like this, not a very nice guy. And then I'm a rape survivor. So my rape took place outside of the context of the film industry. But obviously it did change my life, as it does for any survivor. And in some ways I was so kind of naive and unaware of the issue prior to that happening to me. So I kind of wanted to write a novel that did justice to, I mean, I can't say more without giving the plot away, but did justice to the experiences of women, right? And so throughout the book, yes, Sarah's the main character, but you also have interviews while the journalist is trying to kind of figure out the story, where he's interviewing other women in the industry that interacted with this particular predator. Some of whom are complicit, or some of whom, are more naive or more vulnerable than Sara. So I think there's different layers and different experiences that people have with the same kind of predator. And it's often that kind of those silences and those hidden stories that enable people to kind of get away with that kind of behavior a lot.
Right, exactly. And I think you're touching on a lot of different facets of a complicated and tough issue, which is that I remember seeing a quote one time during the Me Too movement, when the Me Too movement was in full swing, where it said, just because someone else's monster wasn't a monster to you doesn't mean that they weren't a monster to other people. Just because you personally had a not predatory experience with a predator doesn't mean he wasn't preying on other women, which I thought was really interesting. And also that they could, because of course, it makes sense that would be true, but it's interesting when you really stop and think about it. And also that predatory behavior could take many different forms at different points of that person's life, which we see in movies like Bombshell, or in, as allegations came forward about Weinstein. So you're really getting into the meat of it in a very powerful way. Anna Mazzola also speaking about this, saying a fearless and brilliant novel about power, ambition, and abuse in the film industry and what it means to be a survivor. She is, of course, the Edgar Award-winning author of The Story Keeper. It's been such a pleasure to see, all of these rave reviews come in. Now, because it is Monday and some people are at work and unable to tune in, I let people submit questions in advance. So I do want to get to a few of those, Winnie.
Yeah.
So first of all, someone would like to know, do your characters speak to you and lead you, or do you lead them? If the first, have you ever had to change anything because of it? And then Debbie, I'm going to get to your question next.
Ooh, that's a really good question. Do I generally think of the character? I mean, I guess with any author, you think of the character, right? And so, with Sara, I mean, she was always going to be my main character, but she's got a female boss at first, and then this guy named Hugo North takes over, and there's a male director who's quite arrogant as well in the mix. So I kind of always knew, and then Holly, like the kind of the starlet, right? So I kind of always know, it's almost like chess pieces, like, okay, this person's gonna like be here and like have these particular qualities, right? So, but then what happens is once you get let me just speak normally. Once you get your characters into place and you get to know them well enough, you sort of put them in a room together and create a situation, and then they sort of end up not working things out, but then they react to each other in the way that they would, based on their personalities, right? And based on their kinds of, frustrations and tensions against each other, right? So I think I generally know where a story is going to go, but so I'll know, like, I'll have a scene where this roughly happens, but I won't know how that scene will necessarily end. So I'll kind of like set up the scene and have the characters in there, and then and I sort of know the rough outline of what I want to have happen, but all the intricacies of that, it's basically kind of the characters taking over. If that makes any sense.
So then may I assume from that you're not a plotter. You go where the story leads you. Okay. So you sit down and you're just like, wherever the spirit takes me, that's where I'm going. I have no idea what's going to happen.
No, I'm not like that. I'm not that random, but like so I generally know where things are going to go, right? So like overarching, like I kind of know like this is going to happen in the first act, this is going to happen in the third act. There's going to be generally like the big climactic things. I'll know, like, from the beginning of starting the book, like this is going to be the big climactic scene, but everything else in between is kind of just, it's sort of, you just throw it into the mix and see what happens, and how do we get to these other like scenes, if that makes any sense. So I'm kind of not a plotter for sure, but I'm not like completely a pantser. I'm sort of somewhere in between.
I like how you're speaking of first, second, and third acts and big climactic scenes, because I can see your Hollywood days shining through, your film days shining through here. Okay, over to Debbie. Debbie's, thanks very much for tuning in. Always a pleasure to see your name pop up. She would like to know, how does the UK version of the book differ from the one released in the US? You mentioned edits. So let's dive into it. Cover, story, changes. Give us the skinny, Winnie.
Cool. All right. I will show you. I know it rhymes. Let me show you. Okay, so this is the American cover. which no, okay, so it goes like that, right? And then the British cover is this. So it's actually
Ooh.
quite different covers.
Oh
They
my gosh, so different. Okay.
Right. They both
Wow.
they both have a riff on film because if you turn to the sides, they've both got kind of, I mean, you can't really see so much on the American one, but they both have like film reels on the side. And then
Oh
actually
yeah.
one you for the
Oh
British
yeah.
that's quite obvious. So they're quite different.
Okay.
I was happy with both of them. I mean, so essentially in terms of the text itself, so that's how like the finished product, they both look quite different in terms of the cover. But like in terms of text itself, it was acquired by my British editor, who took world rights. So basically, I was working with her, and then, but the aim was obviously to get it ready to sell to American publishers, because that's a bigger market, right? And so when we finally did sell it to American publisher, that editor who acquired it would want to have her own changes made as well, right? So, but she didn't actually have significant changes, which is good, right? And then obviously all the changes needs to sort of be agreed between both sets of editorial teams. So the content changes weren't that big. The copy editing was different because obviously, every editing house, every publishing house is like a slightly different format for, punctuation and things like that. The UK and the US have different spelling, they have different uses of punctuation, different turns of phrase. So even in like, Hugo is a British character, so I had to kind of retain British ways of speaking for him. I'm also an American who's lived in the UK for a long time, so I might accidentally use a British phrase because I'm more accustomed to that than an American phrase. So you just have to kind of pay attention to that. I think there's still some errors in there where I probably sound too British for Sarah. Who knows, right? So it's always like a constant like process where you're like, oh no, that could be tweaked and stuff like that. So but those are kind of like small changes. So like the actual text itself doesn't really vary that much except for like small changes in spelling or like small turns of phrase because of British versus American forms of English. But then obviously the cover's different, but that's because the publishers, you kind of have to trust the publishers know their own markets. They would say like, we think this is going to sell really well to British readers, whereas the Americans thought this was going to sell really well. And then if you do look at them, if you take the same book and you look at not just mine, but if you look at like the American and the British version, just even like the backs of the covers are quite different. Like this is quite common in America where you get like long blurbs across the back. In the UK, they did something quite different where again they retained that film reel thing, but then they just went for like single word.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I think that's so cool. Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Oh, very cool. Debbie, thank you for the great question. I love that question. Thank you for joining us. Sylvia, welcome to the conversation. She'd like to know, why were they different? Were there different artists involved?
Oh yeah, definitely like different artists. I mean, it's two totally different teams, right? So even though it's the same book and it's the same content, it's just kind of they're two different products, right? Because it's different for different markets, right? So I mean, with my first book, Dark Chapter, I had a book which was sold as crime fiction in the US and the UK, but it was sold as literary fiction in Korea, for example, right? And that's partly, maybe the Koreans are like, crime fiction isn't like some publishing houses specialize in crime fiction and not in literary, and some specialize in literary and not in crime fiction. So it's really kind of in some ways up to the publishing house that buys the rights to decide how are they going to sell this book, right? Is our strong point getting crime fiction to connect with readers, or a strong point literary fiction that addresses issues? So once you give it to that publisher, it's theirs to figure out how to turn that into a product that hopefully appeals to readers. So that's where they might choose different packaging, right? Now I've had for my first book, like the same design was used in Iceland and in Sweden and for a few other covers. So some covers did cross borders, but for the most part you get quite different covers for different countries. And then also, some people change the name. So the German publishers always change the name of a book, right? So you get a totally different title in Germany. Happened to me with my Italian publisher as well. They changed the name. So it's, and I guess you just have to assume that they know their readers, and so they know what covers and what kinds of titles are going to appeal to readers in that country. So yeah, different artists for sure, because each publishing house will have different, different graphic designers that they work with.
It is. So I have a secret hobby of looking at different covers from each country because I am fascinated. Sylvia, I encourage you, think of your favorite book and then Google the cover of from different countries. It is fascinating, not only to see how the cover changes, but to see how the title changes. It's not just a translation, where the word complicit is different in German, obviously, but they will change it maybe to something like, I'm just making this up, but like the film industry secret or something like
Yeah.
completely different. It's especially interesting to look at Chinese covers and Russian covers and also Brazilian covers. They change so wildly and differently. And like to what Winnie said, the people on the ground there know what's going to appeal to their readers, and it is fascinating to see how much they change. It is a fun exercise. If you have some time, go check it out. Thank you so much for the great question. Marcy is saying she loves reading the British version of books. Oh, cool, Marcy. What do you like about it? Do you like the different spellings? Do you like the different covers? Tell us. Sylvia's saying, two totally different teams. Now she gets it. Sylvia, fascinating, right? Winnie, what are the names of your two different publishers, just out of curiosity, just so everyone we really get it?
Oh, so Complicit, like in the American version, it's sold by Atria Books, which is an imprint of Simon and Schuster. But they do a lot of thrillers, and a lot of very commercial fiction. So Atria Books, which is part of Simon and Schuster. Complicit in the UK is out with Orion. Again, they do commercial fiction, but they're part of Hachette, which is the big publishing house in Europe. So yeah, I mean, and weirdly, Simon Schuster also exists in the UK, and Hachette also exists in the US, but they don't necessarily, even though it's out with Hachette in the UK, it's not necessarily going to be out with Hachette in the US. So I mean, it's weird, but like, sure, whatever works, and at the end of the day, as the author, you just want the book to be with the best publisher for your book, right? And oftentimes that's like the most enthusiastic editor, right? So Emily Bessler acquired it for Atria because she's got her own label within Atria. Yeah, she's kind of a legend in publishing. So she does like Carolyn Kepnes's books, Brad Thor's books, I Am Pilgrim, so she has, really good taste. And so just to when she liked my book, I was like, that's amazing, right? Yeah, but then there were lots of other really good editors that were interested. So that's kind of it was great to hear. And it's weird to think about because a year and a half later, like the book is finally going to come out in the US. So.
Well, it is great to hear, but she is not the only one. J.T. Ellison, the New York Times bestselling author of most recently Her Dark Lies, who was also on the show when that book came out, raved that, quote, "Complicit is simply brilliant. Beautiful writing, a compelling story, and an intriguing structure." Ali Reynolds, bestselling author of Shiver, said, "With slick, addictive writing and characters that feel so real and relatable, Complicit is both engrossing and completely enraging. I couldn't put it on." Ali came on when Shiver came out. Sylvia saying all of this info is blowing my mind. Right, Sylvia? When you really delve into it, it is so fascinating. Thank you for sharing my fascination with it. Marcy saying she likes to read the British authors as the British author wrote them in their vernacular. So actually another interesting layer here that Winnie, an American expat living in London, writing both fluently in British and American vernacular. Very cool there. Sylvia saying, yes, this publishing and cover information is just fascinating. I totally agree. Well, y'all, we have been having so much fun and just diving in so deep that we're actually way over our time, but time flies when you're having fun. So I want to thank y'all for tuning in. And I want to tell you, this book is out tomorrow. This is a special pre-launch event. The book is not even out yet. So I want to invite you to a pre-order today. And the good folks at Murder by the Book will ship it to you when it comes out tomorrow. So again, Complicit out tomorrow in the US, and you can grab your copy here. So I'm going to pop the link in the comments right here. So no matter where you're watching from, you can click it and you can order. So here it is right here. And be sure to click and order so that you too can read Complicit and then join the Mystery and Thriller Mavens Facebook group where all the good tea is spilled, as the cool kids say, so that we can continue the conversation. Here's that link as well. Winnie, Emily, I want to thank you for coming on and giving us the inside scoop on your amazing book, giving us the scoop on British and American publishing, the scoop on Hollywood. And congratulations. Happy Pub Day tomorrow. Thank y'all for tuning in and joining us. And Winnie, we will look forward to having you when your next book is out.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Sarah. It was great to chat to you on. Thanks for all the really good questions. And I hope you like Complicit if you read it.
Yay. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your Monday. I will see you at 8 p.m. tonight with Haley Scrivener live from Australia. Stay tuned. I'll see you then.